Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It is my extraordinary pleasure to welcome dear friend Rabbi Menachem Penner, who is the Max and Marion Grill Dean of Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan Theological Seminary, which for those of us who are from out of town, we just know he's kind of like the head of the yeshiva of Yeshiva University. Actually, for those of us in Chicago, he's the head of the yeshiva of Yeshiva University. And Rabbi Penner has been a guest in our shul on numerous occasions. It's a pleasure to have him back. And thank you, Rabbi Penner, for giving us time.
It's my pleasure to be here and to again connect with the Chicago community.
And a refuah shleima. I understand that you were hit with the machla.
I missed my original date, but 4.5 weeks later, Baruch Hashem, mostly better.
Wow.
Thank God.
It's complicated. You know, if I remember from the beginning of everything that was going on, not only were you hot and heavy in the issues at yeshiva, but also even big things had to be postponed. Like I had tickets for a Chag HaSmicha, I remember, to celebrate Rabbi Bressler getting the official document.
That is true. Although I think we'd all agree that seems like 5 years ago. Last Purim seems to be about 5 years ago. Yeah. But YU was at the front because the first case in New Rochelle involved a family with a son at YU. And we had to kind of, in many ways, we were the first college that had a case in the country. Yeah, so we had to, unfortunately, break a lot of ground in terms of what was going to happen. But in the end, it was a tremendous bracha that because we had this one case, the entire yeshiva cleared out about a week before other institutions in New York. And I would hate to think what would have happened, especially with some of the older faculty, if they had been here for another week. So it was a tremendous bracha.
But I understand things are opening up second semester now. Another couple of weeks.
More and more. The fact is that first semester, the yeshiva itself was open. About half or a little more than half of the fellows have been back in the base medrash. We're very careful, talking about 8 feet between chavrusas and masks and plexiglass, 8 feet between sets of chavrusas. If you're actually learning with someone within 6 feet, you have to be, there's a plexiglass between the two of you. The shiurim are given in very, very large rooms and guys are separated. So it is, because we have a more mature student body than a typical high school or elementary school, we can get away with much stricter rules. I think everyone here has felt pretty safe. We built a box for Rav Shechter and for Rabbi. We quietly call it like a Pope mobile, but it's like one of the plexiglass. I don't know if it's bulletproof, but
I was gonna say it's the cone of silence.
Yeah, the cone of silence.
I remember that one.
But it's been, there have been very, very few cases, Be'ezras Hashem, and even when there have been cases here at the yeshiva, the level of separation is so great that no one's really having to quarantine. You're really, really separated from everybody else.
So when should I make my tickets for the next Chag HaSmicha?
I'm actually, one of my to-dos today is to start discussing dates, but it looks like March 2022.
Okay.
That's my guess. Looks like March 2022 will be.
You may need another space besides Lampert than normally.
We'll probably have to run one in 2022 and then another one in 2023 because we'll have already caught up with all the other fellows.
So you are one of the experts about tefillah. You've given us shiurim about it. I've heard you speak in so many different settings because you understand.
I'm passionate about tefillah. Very, very passionate about it. That I'll accept.
Okay, so let's talk about tefillah in the age of COVID. Where people are doing it by themselves, where people are in shul but separated, where people are doing it quicker. Is this gonna be good for our tefillah experience? Is this gonna just be a challenge? Where do you see it coming in another 6 months when we go back to normal, please God?
I think that in many ways, it has been a good thing, in the sense that at the core of tefillah is an intimate relationship with Hashem. And I think that in a certain way, being separate and having an opportunity, more time to daven, has allowed us to develop that side of davening. A lot of people have reported that it's nicer to daven at your own pace, at home, in a certain way. And I think that it has, again, brought a focus on the fact that that is really what tefillah is about. Unfortunately, in many of our shuls, the focus of tefillah is sort of the song or the tune that the chazan sings when he's leading musaf for kedusha. And by the way, I don't know if it's controversial to say, or I'm allowed to be controversial at noon in Chicago, but I think that has diminished the woman's role in shul. Obviously, within an Orthodox setting, it's difficult to find ways for women to lead the tefillah. But that's partially our fault that we've made leading the tefillah the key moment of the Shabbos morning service, like, other than Rabbi Matanki's sermon, of course, that's a separate issue. But
We call that
but
the seventh inning stretch.
but the reality is that the key moment of tefillah is a very private moment, no matter which side of the machitza a person is. How many people see the silent amida as the key moment of davening? If you ask people intellectually, they might come up with that, but if you ask them in terms of their experience, it's not the way they experience it. That's the key moment of davening. That's the key moment of the day, according to the Kuzari. The Kuzari has a fascinating comment where he says that really the three tefillot should be the highlights of our day, and everything else should be leading towards it and coming away from it. If we want to relate to him, we could just think of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which serve that role in our lives. We think about it, we plan for it, we can't wait for it, and then we deal with the consequences of it afterwards. But that's the way he describes tefillah, which is nourishment for the soul. So I think a lot of those parts have been improved by the opportunity to daven ourselves. The advantages, however, of davening in shul, I think, are at risk of being cast aside.
It's interesting because I've spoken with others about this, colleagues and friends, or colleagues who are friends, and we've talked about coming out of it. I think shuls will be fine, but they'll be different in the sense that some of the pomp, maybe it's the tunes and some of the kedusha or some of the other elements, even the length of the drasha, will be changed because people are used to a shorter davening. It doesn't mean a longer silent Shemon Esrei. In fact, I discovered during COVID, when we came out of the first lockdown and went into shul, my Shemon Esrei is now longer than it used to be. I used to have to wait for the chazan. He now has to wait for me.
Those are the private elements of tefillah,
Yeah.
which I think have, for many, many people, been uplifted. But the question is, will we lose with some of the benefits of shul and the communal tefillah? The singing does have a lot of value, I believe. And people who are not used to singing, will they say it's not worth the time? Will coming to shul as a group? I mean, there are many people who are meeting in smaller locations, and I know this is every rabbi's fear that all of the backyard minyanim outside will one day become, in 6 months, backyard minyanim inside, because it's more convenient. Will people be as willing to come out if it's raining or snowing in Chicago? If it's snowing, are people going to be willing to make the same effort to come to shul? Because there were so many weeks they davened at home and it was fine. But we still know that davening in the shul is qualitatively better and different and more important, not just halachically, but in terms of one's mindset. It's where I'm concerned that people's involvement in shul will diminish. They'll say it's not such a big deal to daven at home, and they'll miss out on the advantages of being in a shul and in being in a big shul. There's a Barov Am Hadras Melech. You have the sanctuary behind you there. There's a Barov Am Hadras. Is that your sanctuary? Yeah, that's your sanctuary.
Yeah.
There's a Barov. There's a grandeur that I'm afraid will be lost.
Well, it's interesting because there are those people who are not coming back to shul yet. And I find them in two categories. The ones who are not doing things publicly yet, there's the medical concern.
Right.
And no one should ever push them. And then there's the people who are not coming back because there were child care issues. And millennials, if a wife has to work, has to be with the children, then a husband has to be with the children. It's
Mhm.
not as it once was, where there was a division of labor. And so you have a lot of the 20s and 30s
Correct.
who are
Seeing
not,
that all over.
who are not necessarily coming back to shul yet. But those are also people very often who want the socialization. Both groups
Right.
want that socialization. So it may be that we may have some more instances of JFK, if you're familiar with the
I'm very,
just for kiddish phenomena. Okay, but I think
very
people will come back. The
I
big,
think most people are going to come back, but the question is, will they insist on shortening the davening to a place that you can't get the full impact? Will they come out when it's raining and snowing and the occasional Shabbos where it's cold? Um, will they feel that need to come back? So I'm afraid that some of the communal aspects of tefillah are going to suffer from this, whereas the one-on-one sort of experience of talking to God, I think, will probably improve. You know.
the other one is the Berovam Hadras Melech, the large shuls,
Mhm.
which before COVID were already an issue. There are shuls that have, Kins has a few minyanim. There are other shuls that have many, many more minyanim of many different flavors.
Mhm.
My favorite is my son in LA davens in the library minyan at Yik, which they refer to as the curmudgeon minyan. Uh, the curmudgeon, yes. And best part about it is most people have to look up the word, but I've encountered enough that I know what it means. Um,
Explain, not that I don't know, but
uh,
maybe
you
listeners who don't know. So,
yeah. Well, it's spelled with a C. You can look it up. But there are there is a move, at least in America, I think also in Israel, of the smaller, more boutique experiences. Part of it, I think, is to create a different experience. I think part of it is also to create opportunity. In Chicago, we have in our neighborhood, what we call the 50th ward of the city of Chicago, there are nearly 40 Orthodox shuls in 4 square miles, which
right.
probably is a couple of more than we really need. You can have the Haredi shul and the Chassidish shul and the modern Orthodox shul and the Balchuva shul, but we've created the B'nai Torah shul and the shul for the people who are the Bali Tshuva from this country versus that country. So that's already been happening. Is there is there value in that big shul experience anymore, or should we all be looking at these boutique opportunities?
I think there is value to, again, a Barovam Hadras Melech experience, for the power of seeing people. I think there's also value in davening with people who are different from you. Part of the power of Tefillah B'tzibur is to look around the room and to understand that you have positives that others don't have, and you have deficits that others in the room can make up. Um, Davening with a large group of people gets you to think about a large group of people. Am I more likely to include somebody in my tefillah if I see them in shul, than if they're kind of off the radars? Getting together with the community at large, adds an element to my feeling part of the tzibur. But but in general, I think the question for these smaller minyanim is the overriding factor a religious factor, or is the overriding factor a social or a convenience factor? If in fact there's, let's say, a lot of talking in a larger environment, I could see a group of people saying, I'd like a different environment. If there's a group of people that says, I'd like to daven a little earlier because we want to have a little bit of a shear, or I want to switch with my wife who's home with the kids and I want to, but the concern becomes when it's simply about convenience, right? In other words, should people in New York, do you have minyanim still davening outside
Uh,
now?
a couple. We have the great advantage of Chicago weather.
No. So I understand. So I'm asking that.
So
I
I
just
couple.
I just moved to the five towns, and there are a lot of Jews and a lot of people still davening outside. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that my house, which had been unlived in for about a couple of months, basically right outside the house, there's a minyan 3 times a day. But I have to ask myself each time I participate in the minyan, because I've had COVID now, and I will not daven in a minyan where people don't cover their mouths, because I think that's just a chil Hashem. even if I personally have antibodies. I will not daven in a minyan like that. But I have choices now to daven on my front lawn or to daven in a shul that distances and has people masked. And I need to be pushing myself each time to say, why am I choosing a daven on my front lawn now? Am I doing it because I'm in the middle of something and now I can chop the minyan and that's good? Or am I doing it just because it's just more convenient, although I may have more kavana if I daven in shul? So that's where the cheshbonos, I think, come in. So again, I think there is something for davening as a big community, but there can be advantages to smaller minyanim, but the reasoning has to be there. If it's that this place has a better, it's like an inside chevra and they're a peer group and they have good scotch afterwards, you know, things should be driven by, spiritual reasons and not spirit reasons.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're not making those decisions for the others.
Again, I know that CRC gives the okay to a lot of spirits. So
yes, we have a lot of spiritual issues also.
Yeah.
Yes. To shift topics away from tefillah for a minute, but to go over to yeshiva for a minute. A couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Blumenthal as a guest. And we were talking a lot about the issues of crisis and anxiety and concerns. But one of the things that fascinates me is the way the preparation of Rabbanim, of Orthodox rabbis, has shifted so tremendously in my lifetime. In my time, when I was in the yeshiva, what we did is, you had to learn a certain amount of Gemara, then you were allowed into your Yoredei Shir. We were considered to be a quick program. We were only 2 years, 3 starting a day of Yoredei, and we took our bechinos on everything, every test. Imagine on things that, including the laws of Shabbos, more things than most places did, because that was considered a way to be practical. And once a week, we had a 40-minute shir class that was called Practical Rabbinics, that we really hoped wouldn't always be able to meet, because the rabbi who taught it, who was a very dear person, Rabbi Smith, was also very busy, and it sometimes worked out for us. We learned how to read a ketubah. We learned how to don't sit on the hospital bed of a patient when you're visiting them, things like that, very practical kinds of things. But nowadays, the education of Orthodox rabbis at REITs is very different. There is the Gemara, there is the Yoredei, but what goes on beyond it seems to have really shifted tremendously,
right?
Including the psychology. Why?
I'd say probably 2 reasons. First of all, we have to be fair. I had a similar education. I think I had similar thing, practical rabbinics. Learned very, very little. I spent, maybe one hour on doing funerals and all this and that and all this and that. I think we have to be fair that many rabbis had to learn what they needed to do as a rabbi on the job. And many of them did very well with that. But they were many, many years before they got to that place. And I don't want to think about all the korbanos that of people who weren't necessarily, able to take advantage of a seasoned rabbi who knew how to do this. So on the one hand, even if the rabbinic job had stayed the same, I think we have to admit that, many rabbis did not have the skills to do many of these things, as they needed. But I think also the rabbinate has changed drastically, and the rabbi is called upon to do a myriad of things in the community. And I think that's a good thing. A number of years ago in the RCA, there was it may have been in your time, there was a discussion about subdividing the role of the rabbi. Could we encourage large shuls to also hire a social worker to do the counseling, to also hire a program director to be involved in this and that? And I felt that while the rabbi needs to have limits and he needs to know that he's not a mental health professional and he needs to refer people out, part of what makes a rabbi successful is the ability to have so many touch points with the people in his shul. The fact that the one who gives the sermon on Shabbos is also the one who I'm going to with my personal issues, and is also the one on the bus with my kids to the program, to Great Adventure or whatever it is, that actually makes him much more effective. As exhausting as it is to try to wear all those hats, we encourage rabbis to play as multifaceted a role as possible in the lives of their congregants, because every one of those things is a touch point. And every one of those things impacts upon another. But you have to be then trained to be able to do all those things. Rabbis are expected today to do a huge number of things. No one's going to be great at everything, but they need to be able to be pretty good, at many aspects of the rabbinate. And I think that shows from the guys who do all this training.
So what have you've added in psychological training? You've added in the practice. What other pieces of practical have you put in? I assume you haven't done website design, even though
It's basically a master's. We're going to be starting next year, actually, giving our fellows a master's degree just for their professional training, because that's really how much work it is. It's obviously public speaking, and it's obviously psychological training, including use of actors to play balabatim for different kinds of situations. It involves leadership. It involves an enormous amount of self-awareness training. All of the students at REITs now who are going into the professional rabbinate take at the beginning of Smicha a standardized test in emotional intelligence called the Mesquite. The S of Mesquite is Peter Soloway, who's a Solowaychik, who's the president of Yale, and this is his field. And they then spend several years analyzing their results with a therapist here, so they can understand their strengths and their weaknesses in emotional intelligence. We're training them to a huge amount about the life of the rabbi, the personal life of the rabbi, the family of the rabbi, and a lot of practical questions of how do you deal with this issue? How do you deal with this current event? How do you involve, all the way down to tremendous numbers of practical things. If you think about it, what I loved when I was a shul rabbi was that every morning you wake up, you haven't the foggiest idea what's going to happen next. You are involved in all four halakim of Shulchan Aruch. You are involved in the craziest things that go on in the community. The rabbi is involved in all of them. I remember there's a
and that's different as dean of REITs.
It actually is, and I miss the rabbinate. I really do. There's an apocryphal story about Rabbi Schechter once being on the stand at a court case, and they kept apologizing to him. I have no idea whether this is true, but it should be. They kept apologizing him. The case involved issues of a sexual matter between this couple. For some reason, Rav Schechter was being interviewed, and they kept apologizing. And Rabbi Schechter basically said to them, "What do you think rabbis do? Rabbis are faced with these issues 10 times more than the average congregant." So the rabbi really has a vast number of things. That's what I loved about the rabbinate, not court cases and problems, but the fact that I never knew what was going to happen that day. But to prepare a rabbi for a career where he's expected to give a drasha, also know every psychotropic drug, just in case that's what, know every cancer treatment, know how to do a basic amount of marital therapy, and be able to advise people in everything from which pair of tefillin is probably a good pair of tefillin to where they can go in Eretz Yisrael and every school afterwards and this and that. He's got to have quite the education. So we're very excited about what the students are getting. They appreciate it a lot when they're here. They appreciate it more when they get out there and they realize what the rabbinate is.
But isn't that also a shift from where yeshiva was in terms of liberal arts education? That it's a professional master's. It's I don't know what.
The students, almost all of the students have a BA from a liberal arts school already, whether it's YU or an outside college or something like that. I don't think liberal arts were ever really discussed too much during the smicha years. There's so much to cover. I think we just added a tremendous amount of this, professional training. But yeah, more and more there's students who are also pursuing other kinds of degrees, whether they be in Jewish studies at Revel. We're starting probably a doctoral program for those who are in the Kol Elyon, which will involve studies in the humanities, as well as their studies in Gemara and Halacha. So we're heading in that direction a lot. REITs is beginning to go into the master's and the doctorate place.
So you'll graduate rabbi doctor.
It will be for the public. Probably this summer we'll unveil a master's degree in Jewish learning for the public on Zoom across the country, if they'd like to learn, but also pursue some sort of a degree.
Yes. Is that bringing REITs closer into the formal part? REITs has always been a separate institution 501c3. I don't know the right determination from yeshiva. Is that bringing REITs more into the total university?
No, actually, it technically REITs always had the ability to give. We're actually accredited to give these kinds of degrees. In 1970, there was the official separation, all the fights on campus, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and everything that happened where REITs separated as a religious institution from the university, which is a secular institution. Someone thought in 1970 that when we left the university, that meant we could no longer offer advanced degrees. But New York State does not feel that way. And somebody thought that in 1970, 50 years later, because of COVID, and we've had the opportunity to do a lot more brainstorming than we've done in the last 20 years combined, we found out we're accredited to give degrees. So we'd like to try to do that in a number of fronts. There'll be a master's degree for students who come for 1 year after college, whether they attended YU for college or not. A master's degree probably in Jewish ethics. We're going to be opening up. A master's degree in Talmudic law for 1 year afterwards, plus a master's degree for the public in Jewish learning on Zoom, a master's degree in professional rabbinics, and possibly a doctorate of some sort for those who are in the Kol Elyon here. So there's a tremendous amount going on during COVID time here at the yeshiva.
So it's been a terrible experience that you found the lemonade.
Personally and all and well. I'd say part of it is due to the reset button. And I think we said this, we had a meeting last week with a lot of rabbis. I think every shul has to realize that there's an opportunity now to think about a reset button for shuls, for the Jewish community. We're so busy in the day-to-day, and there's such momentum of this is the way we did it last spring, but we didn't do anything last spring except hide in our homes, Baruch Hashem, to stay safe. There's an opportunity for the entire Jewish community that has been disrupted to press a reset button this fall, whether it's a shul or a school or YU or smicha and all this and that. So part of it has been that, but part of it has been how ubiquitous Zoom has become, which allows us to do this during a lunch break and allows me, the reason why I was a few minutes late getting on, we wanted to get on for a minute before, was I forgot that we had to be on 5 minutes before. But we had a wonderful conversation with REIT students who had come from secular colleges and are now around the country to talk to them about their experience. How do we get more fellows who choose secular college to come to REITs? That kind of bringing together people to brainstorm, that would have been weeks of work. And now you snap your fingers, you have an idea,
And everyone together.
You've completely fleshed it out with 30 different stakeholders. So, the opportunity to be entrepreneurial during this pandemic, I hope for other institutions, not only, profit institutions also, has been tremendous if you take advantage of Zoom.
And there has been a great advantage from REITs as well for Rav Schechter's emergence as really the posek for our community. We have joked about it in different calls and different settings, but that our community has been the community that has had the greatest fealty to Das Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Any of the communities. Rav Schechter said yes, Rav Schechter said no. That was the final word on matters, and we were very careful and cautious with those things. So that's also been a great piece.
I think very often that we confuse our community. We have certainly, yeshiva envy. We look always over our shoulder to the right, and we see a certain strength in numbers and certain things. But at the end of the day, even the most right-wing YU student has certain principles that he believes in that make us fundamentally different from our brothers and sisters who are to the right of us. They include our support for Eretz Yisrael. They include the way we look at women. They include the way we look at non-Jewish world. They include the way we look at secular Jews. They include science and the way we look at health. And whether a YU student is a male or a female, wears a Hawaiian shirt or a white shirt and a hat, there are some fundamental beliefs that our community has. And one of them is fundamentally, how do you deal with a pandemic and how do you put science and health and medicine forward? And I think that many people, even in our community or just to the right of our community, who let's say straddle the fence of the yeshiva world and sort of the larger modern Orthodox YU RCA kind of world, have been able to kind of say, wait a minute, I really do believe in those principles. Maybe there are some things about the modern Orthodox world that aren't for me, and maybe, but at my core, that's who I am. I do believe that work is a good thing. It's not a b'di'evet. It's not something I just have to do to make a parnas. I believe in secular education for the value of it, not just, because you may have to get a job.
And we believe in the same Torah, Baruch Hashem. So
Right.
we are all.
You absolutely do. But I think there are just some of these fundamental principles that in day to day, we don't verbalize what they are and what we believe in at our core. And I think that the pandemic has very much, because of the health implications, has sort of highlighted that, that of course we believe in medicine. Of course we believe you should wear a mask. Of course we believe you should get a vaccine. Like, how could you believe in anything else? And I think, I remain shocked that so many from the Frum community are not in the same camp on those issues. I can't understand them. I respect them. I love them. I can't understand how so many people are going around without masks and what that means.
And on that note, I have taken your time because you have time. You have to go back and innovate even more.
Now I have to go back and innovate. And I have my mask here somewhere, so I can go
now your
down.
mask is somewhere you can see another person. But I thank you for this time. It's been fascinating.
It's my pleasure. If you want to do this without an audience, we don't always need an audience for this. We could just schmooze.
It was been a pleasure.
It's really my pleasure. And
thank you so very much, Rabbi, and B'hatzlacha and everything. And it's great to see you up and running.
Regards to Chicagoland.
Bye-bye. Thank you.